Hello chess friends, this is Nazmican. In this video I will continue looking at the Clash of the Titans, the games between Carlsen and Kasparov. In the first game Carlsen couldn't convert his pawn plus into win, and in the second game of the match he had to stop Kasparov with the black pieces. But he couldn't manage to do so and he was beaten badly, as we shall see. Okay, let's go at the moves. Here Kasparov is white and Magnus Carlsen is black. This was the second game of their rapid match in Reykjavik tournament in 2004. Kasparov opens the game with the move c4 and Carlsen goes for the King's Indian defense. Nowadays King's Indian doesn't take part in Carlsen's opening repertoire, but at the early days of his career he has many games with King's Indian, and this is one of them. Knight f3, castles, bishop e2, e5, and now instead of going for the main lines of Mar del Plata variation with this is called Mar del Plata variation, Kasparov chooses the move bishop e3. This is Grigorich variation of King's Indian, which is still quite popular at grandmaster level. The idea of this variation is to somehow prevent knight c6 move, because now knight c6, then white plays d5, and now knight d2, and this placement of white pieces considered to be ideal, and for this reason black players generally try to avoid this setup and try to disturb white pieces by playing knight g4, attacking this bishop, or play the move e takes d4 as Carlsen did in this game. Kasparov responded with the knight takes d4, c6, f3, giving more protection to this e4 pawn, rook e8, x-raying on the e file and trying to prepare the move d5, and Kasparov played the move bishop f2. In the year of 1990, Kasparov played a brilliant game against Karpov in the 11th game of the World Championship match. In that game, Karpov played the move queen d2, which was the main line until that game. Kasparov played d5, e takes d5, c takes d5, c5, knight c6, castles, and Kasparov played a brilliant exchange sacrifice at that game, and he played rook takes e3 and played the move queen f8, attacking here, and he gets enough compensation to throw out this game, and for this reason white players from then and on try to deviate from the move queen d2 and play the move bishop f2, d5, the same idea, and also white reacts in the same way and plays the move c5. He creates the pawn majority on the queen side and he will try to advance this pawn majority, and black will try to break the blockade of this isolated pawn on d5 by playing the moves knight c6, and he will later maneuver his pieces in order to break this blockade on d4 square. Incidentally, in the first game of the match, Carlsen played also another game with an isolated pawn, but at that game I think it's nice to remember, so I will try to revert that game. In that game he used the strengths of the isolated pawn, which are placing the outpost pieces on c5 and e5, and later to push d5. As in the game he played the d5 move, and this is the way how to play with the isolated pawns. You should not allow your opponent to block on the d5 square, and Carlsen managed to exploit all the strengths of this isolated pawn in that game. But in this game he couldn't solve the problems of isolated pawn of d5 here. He couldn't break the blockade on d4, and for this reason he couldn't get counterplay in the center by pushing these pawns, or he couldn't make use of the outposts created on e4 and c4, which is also very hard in this position. So as we shall see, Kasparov successfully employing the ideas of putting a blockader on d4 and later attack the weak d5 pawn in the future. Okay, Carlsen played the move knight c6, logically developing move, and try to attack the d4 knight, castles. And now black's idea starts here. He plays the move knight h5. His idea is to maneuver this knight on the e6 square in order to, as I mentioned, to destroy the white's blockade on the d4 square. And also now he's threatening to play knight f4 here. So for this reason, queen d2, connecting the rooks and giving some protection on the f4 square. And Carlsen played the move bishop e5. As I mentioned, he's trying to maneuver on this direction, and for this reason he gives space for his knight to go g7. And also he has ideas of playing knight f4, so this has to be prevented, and Kasparov played logical move g3, but this somehow weakened the white squares, and Carlsen tries to exploit these weaknesses by playing bishop h3. Although Carlsen played this move with tempo, developing his bishop and attacking this rook on f1, it should be better to play knight g7 immediately to employ this idea, and after let's say take on e6, he can take with his bishop, and by doing that he will not lose time on this exchange. As we shall see, after bishop h3, white played the move rook f e1, and this bishop in some variations might get trapped. Carlsen played the move knight g7. He is playing the permanent idea and trying to break the blockade here. Rook a d1, bringing the last force into play, and now Kasparov is ready for the actions in the center, and he will attack black weaknesses, mainly on d5 square. And Carlsen played the move rook c8, which is probably already losing here. It's hard to advise a move here. If Carlsen played knight e6 here, then it's easy to consider white's moves here. Knight takes e6. Of course, bishop cannot take because there is knight d5. So f takes e6 is forced. And one nice illustration of white's idea of trapping this bishop is f4, bishop g7, and g4. Now this bishop is in danger of getting trapped, so black has to do something about it. If, let's say, he tries to counterattack in the center by playing d4 after knight e4, white has ideas of playing knight d6 or knight g5, and this bishop will get trapped here. So if queen d5, in order to create some counter threats on g2 square, then white has simple bishop f3 move, preventing black's idea and also threatening many discovered attacks here. So black is lost. And after rook a d1, black should probably play the move bishop e6, but it's also very hard to do such a move when you try to play knight e6 and bishop is already developed on h3 square. It's hard to make such moves, so it's understandable that Carlsen tried to develop his forces by playing rook c8, but now white is ready for the action, and he's starting his play on black's weaknesses, mainly on d5 and on d6 squares. And now white is threatening to take on d5. Carlsen played the move, understandably, a6. And now after knight d6, white gets very important black bishop by playing c takes d6. Now, as we shall see, the black squares on the king side is very weak after this exchange, and white will soon exploit these weaknesses. Carlsen played the move d4, and it's also easy win for white after queen takes d6, because there is knight takes d5. And when I check this position with the computer, it gives +2 score for white, which means it's completely winning. But it's not easy to understand why it's winning, because now there are ideas of trapping this bishop still, and black has no good ways to make useful moves. If, let's say, he plays this way, then this bishop might get trapped on h3 after the exchange of queens, or let's say rook cd8, which looks strong, pinning the knight, but there is queen g5 move. White will exploit the weaknesses on black's camp. Mainly now knight f6 is threatened, so it's already very hard for black to get rid of this trick. Let's say black can play king h8, but then there is knight f4, double attack on queen and bishop, so black is losing a piece. For this reason, Carlsen goes for the move d4, and after knight e4, white protects his d6 pawn and trying to create ideas of attacking h3 and creating mating ideas on the black king. So Carlsen played the move bishop f5, but this loses material instantly. You might stop your video in order to find what's the best way to finish the game off. Kasparov played a very nice move here, which is d7. This is of course a double attack, but this pawn on d7, although it can be taken in two ways, it's losing. Of course, queen takes d7 can be met by knight f6, forking the queen and the king. So Carlsen played the move bishop takes d7, but this time there's bishop takes d4, threatening to take on g7 and take on d7, and also threatening knight f6, which leaves black no choice but for the move knight d4. It's also possible to play rook takes e4 in order to get rid of white's threats, but this is also losing after f takes e4. Knight takes d4 was played, and after queen takes d4, white is losing a piece. Both d7 and knight f6 are threatened. Carlsen sacrificed his piece because there is no way. Queen takes d7, queen b6 check, hoping for king g2, knight e3. Of course, king h1 wins immediately. Rook ed8. Carlsen is trying to fight on. Queen a4 takes, and after take on b2, Kasparov tried to exchange queens, because if this happens, then he will win the game. And after rook c2, queen takes, rook takes, bishop c4, protecting his pawn. And this is straightforward task for Kasparov. And for this reason, after knight d4, attacking here, Kasparov played the move rook e3, and Magnus Carlsen resigned. A very nice game for Garry Kasparov, but it's very instructive to see how black's position collapsed in the opening after 17 moves. Rook ad1, and after Carlsen's mistake rook c8, it's almost impossible to stop white's initiative after on. And also that was very instructive to see in both games. Carlsen has the isolated pawns on d4 and d5 respectively. In the first game, he used his isolated pawn in a very effective way, and he gets a big advantage after all. But in the second game, his d5 pawn gave him headaches, and he couldn't solve his problems with his pawn, and lost the game after just 10 or I'm checking 12 moves after this moment. So the nice games in this rapid match, they are very nice to watch for us and instructive. I hope you also like it, and see you in the next videos.